code. Captured a sound on one album, but then the rest of all of their stuff kind of sucks, which is a bummer. But this really nice sound on this. Anyways, hey guys, Free Will here, and I want to talk about intrusive thoughts. I want to talk about thoughts. I want to talk about just some of the implications of, I don't know, free will, volition, intrusivity, because I think it's an interesting topic. I think we can get a lot out of that, and it's highly considerable. Because I don't know if I believe in intrusive thoughts. I mean, I believe in them in principle, but I don't know if I believe in the fact that we are the ones thinking our thoughts, or there being some kind of entity that's individual, or that is separate and responsible for the thoughts thunk, perhaps. Well, maybe I do, but I would just call that God. I wouldn't call that some sort of little person here inside my head who I can point at, who's the one who's kind of throwing his hands around and making a tantrum and thinking some sort of challenging hogwash, which more thoughts, which would just be more of his challenging hogwash, would disagree with and find frustration with. So I kind of want to speak to this dynamic because it's something that I have come into contact with in my life as I started to become aware of some of the thoughts that I was thinking, some of the things that went through my mind, which I felt like for the longest time in my life I never really realized. I've spoken at length before about my process of falling in love and how that happened, where basically I was very driven to fall in love. I was driven to be with someone. I was driven to connect. But when I did so, I struggled, and I had a lot of questions, and I had a lot of things that would go through my mind that were challenging and that kept me up at night. That made me frustrated. That made me behave or act in certain ways which I couldn't ignore. And in the exposure and in the vulnerability of love and in care and in connection, it brought me to recognition as such. It brought me to the fact of the situation and into deeper consideration and showing up for some of these facts of attachment, some of these facts of the drama and the ambivalence perhaps of love, at least in my view. I think the ones we love the most, the hardest ones to love are the ones that we love the most. Which might piss a lot of people off, and I'm all for the ambivalence that shows up in our deepest sentiments towards life. And I really met myself in love, perhaps. I really met so much of what went under the surface, perhaps. And maybe this is when I really started to, we have this notion of the unconscious, the unconscious mind. And a lot of us, it's kind of fell out of favor throughout the 20th century, it seems. And I think that's kind of a shame. And at least in my view, and in what I see, this is really the work of our humanity. And I don't see enough of this taken seriously, perhaps. Because there's so much content, there's so much available in our personalities, and I think to really meet ourselves and to be with the extent of our personalities, personality as in whatever the hell you are, whatever the hell we can really point to, you know, an ego, a self, you know, like this thing which is thinking and which is kind of organizing reality, you know, like we have sensations and happenings, but you see, this is where it gets kind of tricky, but like, you know, we have this is like the materialist notion of what we are and of identity, you know, we are a skin-encapsulated ego. So whatever that ego thing is, whatever that self-aware sort of metacognitive re-representation perhaps is, fuck, I don't know, what the hell is an ego? What the fuck is the ego, you know? And like we talk about it in spirituality, we talk about it in psychology, or we talk about it in psychoanalysis, or whatever the fuck. I feel like I will ask myself that question for my whole life. But we have this problem of what knows? What is self-aware? What is able to reflect and to bring itself into the light of consciousness? You know, we have this notion of bringing the unconscious into the conscious. And I think for me, in my experience, I had a lot of this unconscious content because this is the sort of typical sort of model that we have this unconscious content perhaps, and it shows up in our instinctual feelings. It shows up in that, let me give an example. My mom knocks on my door in my room, and I just had a day at school where perhaps I was brought into, I think the music's got to be really loud. That's terrible. I'm gonna adjust for that now. I was at school and there was some, you know, I have this math test I need to do, and I'm worried that I'm not gonna be able to show up for that because I need to get a certain mark on that math test, and I don't feel confident, I don't feel skilled in my ability. The assignments I've been given and the way the teacher relays this information, I can't focus because I'm focused on other things, I'm focused on other issues, I'm focused on the fact that I don't like the way my body looks, or I don't, I don't know how I feel about something I see in the world, you know, I have some other diversion and some other distraction, but I can't, I'm trying to paint the picture of the conflict and the drama of human life, and essentially, in the exam, my mom knocks on the door and she wants me to go walk the dog, and I am studying for my math, and I'm frustrated because my math isn't fitting all of my preferences and my sort of ideals and ideas of how I want things to be, and it's challenging me. It's challenging me at my survival level because, look, I need to do well on this math test. I need to show up in the world, and bad things are going to happen if I don't. And then I have this new distraction. I have this new thing I have to do, and my mom's at the door. Then I know that she's going to have me do something, and then, you know, I have to go walk the dog, or I have to go do this and that. And I don't want to do that because then it takes my time. And you see how there's all of these different factors. There's all this organization. There's all of this weighing. And it really weighs on our instinct, our own will to survive, our own will to whatever the fuck it is, to be honest, whatever the fuck it is in us which is challenged and which has to show up for its survival, perhaps. I'm really trying to outline the conflict and the sort of deep richness of our organization, because I think the ego is just an organizing mechanism which essentially takes in information, processes that information, takes in feelings, and is bound by the instincts, essentially, is bound by what it is in us which is driven, you know, which needs, which is purely volatile, because you can have a reaction like, I throw a ball at you, you don't think about it, there's no A to B sort of process there, it's just you jump out of the way, especially when you have like a degree of whatever the fuck it is in us which makes us more jumpier than others. That's volition, that's instinct, that's that sort of drive, and I think that animates and that sets up the ego, perhaps that sets up organization, that sets up identity and preference, and I think our preference is ultimately reducible to that. So what that essentially does is it has challenging content. You have to go walk the dog. You need to do your math. You need to fit into your society. You need to also not need to fit into your society, because when you need to fit into your society, when you need to walk the dog, when you need to do all this and that, you have this conflict, you have this frustration, you have these sorts of, and by you I'm really referring to my own experience, but I imagine a lot of this stuff is universal, humanly universal, so I can kind of speak with a projection, perhaps, if we want to assume that, you know, how much can we put forth as universal, how subjective in postmodern do we want to get, like, oh, people in other cultures don't have feelings. You know, I can't put any sort of, you know, this is confusing, but we have to, I think the most threatening part is the realities of the challenge itself. And I think this is really what I think Freud got at quite clearly, is the repression and the ignorance to what takes place, to the maneuvers and the sleight of hand of the organizing faculty. For example, when my mom comes to my room, I need to compose myself, and maybe there's frustration, there's a tickle, there's something here which feels challenged, and maybe that appears as intrusive thoughts. It appears as this sort of content where it's like, maybe it's angry, it thinks some sort of maybe slightly violent, slightly volatile, slightly antisocial. I don't know what kind of content is there. I just know that if I'm honest with myself, there's some interesting things which fly through my think tank, and I don't think I'm alone with that. You know, we all talk about how uncomfortable our minds are, and I think part of that discomfort comes from the discomfort of the actuality of the content and the implication of that content. And I think intrusive thoughts that we don't like, are too convenient because they have to be organized, it has to be sorted, you know, like we can't accept the reality of, let's say in this example, of feeling some sort of frustration towards mom at the door in the challenge of organization of the facts of the situation, being the math that I have to do, the fact that I need to go out and walk the dog, you know, and that I need to show up a certain way for my mom, because if I'm angry to my mom, she's going to be angry at me, and then I'm going to be punished, and I'm going to feel bad, and my shame and my sense of needing to be good and composed, and my sort of social boundaries get kicked in, and those were forced into me. The same through the necessities of these sort of needs and vicissitudes which existed in me in my development, you know, which vied for food and for closeness and for attachment and for nourishment as such. And when I would show up in a way which was not conducive and composed as such, when my aggression and my frustration was expressed, it was not contained, perhaps, you know, and it was taught to not express itself because we can't have that, you know what I mean? Like we can't, like, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna get up and start throwing shit around because I'm frustrated with life, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I think what we do is we take all of that frustration, all of that content, because it's ugly, it's fucking ugly, and I don't know about you guys, but you know, that's what I wanted to get in this video, is that, and what I needed to really know, because I had so much ugly content within me, and I still do. It's fucking gross sometimes, the shit that flies through my mind, and to hold it in containment so that we can bring it into better organization, because I think our minds are a mess and we don't have the time, we don't have the collective importance towards organizing our mind and showing up for the content which exists there. And I think this is why we have issues like, fuck, not being able to focus or attend to certain things because we have all these different conflicts and all this unorganized material flowing through our fucking minds that we don't look at, that we don't pay attention to because it's too challenging. Like, what do you think depression is? What do you think anxiety and all this different? It's just different content flooding through our minds, and we don't know what the fuck to do with it. So what do? We step into self-awareness. We step into the whole cognitive behavioral jiu-jitsu game, you know, where we wrestle with our thoughts and essentially use new thoughts and erect new sort of organizing faculties which are more based in a certain objectivity perhaps, and through challenge and through, you know, the consideration in the light of our, what is it, turning inwards essentially, you know, which can recognize certain content and really test it against the reality of the situation, get out of our sort of first person perspective rather than being all of those thoughts and having that reactivity and having that tickle and acting that out. Be that, you know, mom comes in and maybe in some case, let's say I have like a borderline personality or something, I fucking lose my shit and I erupt and I just fucking, worst case scenario, I throw something at my mom. Or, you know, maybe I just speak to my mom in a slightly passive-aggressive tone and I take that content and I make it about her, you know what I mean? And I would say, this is my radical sort of view, that both of those reactions, both of those behaviors are delusional, but in a different degree. And I think that that's tricky because on one hand, it's not about her and it's not fair to put that content onto her. But the reality is, that is the way that we feel. That is our instinctual sort of actuality in that moment of anger, of frustration, of being fed up, and it looks for an object and it looks for something to find, something, somewhere to put that, you know what I mean? Because it's uncomfortable to just experience that, to just be with that, to just sit with the grossness of our personality, perhaps, if that's the case. And it's gross because it's not allowed, it's not conducive, it's not social. But you know what also isn't social is not acknowledging that content, not showing up for that, not really treating that with the utmost sort of gratitude, love, respect, and significance. And I think it's hard, and I've really been noticing that this week, and I really feel like I have paid a lot of attention to that content to scary degrees, and I think it is a rabbit hole. I do believe in the shadow. I do believe in the depths of our humanity and what we are capable of, and the fact that, God, like, what are we? Are we what we are, or are we what we do? And I want to say we're both. You know, we have this notion of, you know, we're not, our thoughts don't matter. It's okay. You know, we all have different thoughts, but to what extent is our thoughts what we are? To what extent does it matter that, God, maybe we have these intrusive sort of desires or things which flood through our mind? Why are we interested in shit like true crime? Why are we interested? Why do we listen to the music that we listen to? What are these expressions? What is this sort of content that exists within us? And how does that show up in our behavior, even in covert ways? You know what I mean? Like, how, like, what is the depth behind this, behind us? Like, what really exists there, and how accessible is it? And I would say that I do believe in a shadow. I do believe in a repression. I do believe in the unconscious, because it just matches my experience. It was threatening to admit that I was looking for something out of relationships, and I still look for something out of relationships, which is dehumanizing, which is looking to satisfy its own needs, which is looking to get away from this sense of not being enough, and looks for compensation as such in some sort of ideal object which exists outside of me, purely for the sake of my own desire as such. Narcissism, fuck, it's gross. And I would say that recognition of the grossness of that only came as a result of the recognition and of bringing that content into question, into judgment, so that it could realize the delusion of its own sort of being, and can hold itself, can hold that content with the recognition of its unreality, with the recognition of, oh God, it's not all about me. And I think we all obviously have that content to an extent, and I think the degree of our health is our ability to show up for that content. But the thing is, some of us just only have that amount of content. But the thing is, what makes a good person? What makes a good person? And some of us seem to have more or less degree of that content. And what is our ability to show up for that? And what is the average amount of content that's there? What is the average amount of selfishness? The average amount of, I don't know, whatever the hell badness is. And for me, it was only until feeling the consequences of some of my most deepest held sort of realities of my personality, and having those be undeniable, in that challenge of that, I had to find a way to be with that, to find answers, to find betterment, you know, but it wasn't until I was open to that, it wasn't until I could really experience that, and that could be the case, and that wasn't just some intrusive passing thing, like that was like, no, this is what I am, this is what I'm capable of, is this the way that I want to be? And I think it's through this process that this content can sort itself out, so that the drives flowing through us, because that's the root of this content, if you know what I mean, like that is, I think, what it stems from. And I think our thoughts are just representations of that more primitive sort of whatever the fuckness which is animating our experience, whatever the fuck matter is, you know, if we want to reduce to matter monistically, whatever the fuck is determining our minds and its content. And it seems to be changing throughout history, throughout our evolution, and it seems like, at least in my view, through its recognition of itself, through the act of attention and of awareness and of care, primarily of care.